All right, everybody, welcome to Land the Latch. If we don't already know one another, I'm Taylor. I'm an IBCLC lactation consultant. I've been a doula for a little over a decade, and I'm the mother to a very charismatic, spicy preschooler who was breastfed until she was 3.5 years old. I'm also soon expecting my second baby. Today's class is going to be rich, and it's also going to be quite packed. So we're going to kind of dive right in today. Again, a reminder that there will be a recording of the session today, and at the end, I will also stay behind to answer questions. I've set aside about an hour and a half in this meeting. If you have to come and go or leave early, that's okay, but I will certainly make space for questions at the end. I plan to teach for about 45 minutes to an hour. If anything pops up in our time here together, please use the chat feature. That's what it's here for. Pop questions in, and I'll kind of try to keep eyes on it. And if I miss something, just feel free to ask a question at the end when I make time for questions. So, a little bit about me. As I mentioned, I've been a doula for many years. And I did my IBCLC lactation consultant training between 2019 and 21. So, kind of right through the COVID era when I was pregnant. And I had kind of just completed that training by the time I was 38 weeks pregnant. By the time I had my first baby, I had helped probably more than 1,000 people breastfeed. And I still managed to get cracked nipples and vasospasm in my breastfeeding journey. This photo here is actually the first time that I breastfed my daughter. Now, I was privileged to have access to support and, skills and experience that allowed me to overcome these challenges. But really, what I learned through experiencing breastfeeding my child and overcoming these challenges is that I really needed to understand the parts that we're not teaching well and kind of figure it out. Um, so, why are we here today? Really, I'm going to tell you a lot about getting a solid latch, which is a foundational skill in breastfeeding your infant. The most common reasons for stopping breastfeeding earlier than one had hoped to or planned to are pain and low milk supply or perceived low milk supply. So we might think we don't have enough milk, even if we do. But both of those are the most common reasons. Now, having a functional and comfortable latch prevents pain and damage of your nipples. And it also allows your baby to actually more effectively transfer milk and to get more milk and to kind of facilitate that ongoing milk production and stimulation. So, by doing a better job of teaching this foundational skill, we're kind of helping to prevent some of the most common reasons that folks stop their breastfeeding journeys earlier than they wanted to. Now, most classes, anytime you look up anything online, any tutorials you see, you're going to see a lot of focus on the angle of the infant's lips. So you might see lips open in a 160-degree angle or wider. Not that anyone's getting out their like protractor from math classes in school. And even the direction of the nipple. So what I mean by that is if you look at little image 1 there, you'll see the tip nose to nipple or nipple to nose, and making sure baby has a really wide mouth. And these are important tips. We're going to kind of review those a little bit. However, I also want us to zoom out a little bit further and consider feeding and breastfeeding as more of a full body function for an infant. So I'm going to explain what that means in a few moments. But for today's purposes, really, I want us to zoom out and pay attention not only to the position of the nipple and to baby's mouth, but also what's going on with baby's whole body. I actually want to start out with pointing out that what we see teaches us, for better or worse. And what we observe and what we see impacts our behavior. Something that folks might or might not know about me is I have a degree in child development, but most normal people who took my degree had a minor in psychology or something related, I did a lot of history. I love history and I love art history. And so the reason I'm showing you this artwork from the 18th and 19th centuries is because I want to point out how breastfeeding is depicted here. So, obviously these are a little bit curated and posed for the purpose of creating the art, but you're going to notice some common themes here. Um, Interestingly, the scissor hold that the mothers are using, I'm going to tilt my camera down a bit. This scissor hold of the breast. Infants are kind of sprawled across the parent's lap, right? And there's a lot of upright positioning, but generally, these parents are kind of sitting comfortably upright instead of hunched right forward and right over. And there's a very kind of casual hold of baby's body and a bit of a scissor hold of the breast. And there's some additional, from different time periods, different countries, different artists, very similar themes in how breastfeeding is depicted here. Now, in the mid to late 20th century, human milk substitutes and bottle feeding became the cultural norm. And you kind of look at images or just general behavior with how we feed babies, you can see we tend to hold babies pretty high up. And of course, bottles are propped up. If you're looking at the common themes in these images here, it's a cross cradle hold and a bottle propped up. And I point that out because as we began to see a shift in how breastfeeding is performed, in our culture of infant feeding, so that normalization of bottle feeding, it's also affecting how breastfeeding is performed and attempted. So that's kind of a reflection of that bottle feeding culture. So if you notice in these images that are a little bit more modern, we actually tend to see babies being held up higher, kind of propped up. We buy the breastfeeding pillow to prop our babies up. And these images in particular are a little bit more reflective of bottle feeding positions than you would notice if we looked back at 18th, 19th century and how infants were being held and handled to breastfeed then. So this paired with the fact that in our culture, we don't often see families breastfeeding publicly. What that has kind of led to is the fact that this cross cradle position, so baby kind of on one side, propped up really high and being held across the body, perhaps with a breastfeeding pillow, that's a position that actually tends to be associated with the most nipple pain and damage because we don't breastfeed in the same way that we bottle feed. So kind of coming back to this concept of breastfeeding is a full body function. In order to understand that, we need to look beyond just what the mouth is doing. So today, we're going to review a few pointers and tips that I'm using daily with people in my lactation consults, in my home visits when somebody has nipple pain. And we're going to review asymmetric latch, the chin lands the latch, neck extension and body alignment. We're going to talk about how proximal stability leads to distal mobility. I'm going to give you some general position tips, and we're going to actually look at a few examples. Now, if all of this sounds really foreign, I'm going to explain it in great detail. I also want to mention, though, before we get into it, that getting a good latch is a highly experiential skill. So it's something that every one of us is going to need to practice with your own baby and with your own body. Knowing the concepts is helpful, but there's also practice because all breasts are going to be different shapes and sizes, and all babies are going to be different shapes and sizes. And there is still a learning curve of bringing it all together. I can attest to that myself, having helped many, many people breastfeed and still having a bit of a learning curve. But with that said, having this foundation of understanding with you is going to be very, very helpful because once you've had your baby after laboring and giving birth, or perhaps even going through a major abdominal surgery, you're probably going to be tired. And it's not the most optimal time to be absorbing and retaining a lot of information. So this foundation will give you a really good start. And don't beat yourself up if there's a little bit of a learning curve. So the first concept that we'll visit here is that of the asymmetric latch. So basically, what that means is that instead of opening your baby's mouth and trying to aim the nipple for the middle of your baby's mouth, we actually want to tilt the nipple up towards the palate. So the reason for that is because when there is sensory stimulation of the palate further back, so somewhere between the hard and soft palate, if you were to run your tongue from the right behind your teeth on the top of your mouth, you would feel it's really bony on the top. And if you ran it further back, you would feel there's a spot where it gets softer. That's where we want the nipple to actually reach. When there's sensory stimulation there, it triggers a sucking reflex automatically. So the image on the right here demonstrates a good way to get an asymmetric latch. So we start with kind of placing the nipple right between baby's upper lip and nose, which should often stimulate a rooting reflex, or baby will open wider, and then bringing the baby onto the breast in a way that the nipple is actually pointed towards the palate. The image on the left hand, or sorry, the right side. I think I got my rights and lefts mixed up there. Apologies. The image on the left hand side kind of gives you an idea of what that would look like if we had X-ray vision to look inside the mouth. So it's this asymmetric latch where we're not trying to point the nipple right into the middle. That often ends up really shallow and really chompy, but we're actually trying to bring baby down a little bit so that that nipple can point to the palate. We're going to zoom out a little further than this. The nipple to nose thing, again, the nipple to nose tip that you might hear in the hospital or with providers or other support people is specifically referring to the direction that the nipple is pointed before your infant even opens their mouth to latch on. And this is one way that we can achieve an asymmetric latch. So use this as a bit of a check-in to determine where your baby already is before you latch them on. Is the nipple pointed to the chest before they even open up and latch on? Is it here at their chin, or is it up here? This does not mean bring your baby's nose down to the nipple. So there's a distinction here. So I'd want you to kind of tug your baby down so that the nipple is lined up with baby's nose. Not what I often see, and why I don't really use this tip a lot, is if your breast is down here and you go, oh, nipple needs to be near the nose. Oftentimes what we do is we actually tilt baby's head down so that the chin kind of comes down to the chest. And that often leads to a shallower latch. So babies will open wider when their chin is the first thing to touch the breast as you kind of bring them into your body. So we often think of babies at opening their mouths like a lever, as in the image on the top. But what's more accurate is they actually they open up by anchoring their chin. And so what happens if the chin is able to touch the breast first, that tends to stimulate a wider opening and we can get a deeper latch. So the image at the top kind of shows if our nipple is positioned right in the middle as baby opens up their mouth, they tend to get quite shallow. But if they anchor their chin, they can actually get a much wider mouth and a much deeper mouthful of breast tissue. Neck extension is also important here, and body alignment. So we've kind of looked at the angle of the mouth, like we want a nice big wide mouth. The nipple kind of pointed towards the nose and bringing your baby onto the breast, making sure that their chin can kind of anchor in your breast. But I want to give you a tip that I think a lot of people, it clicks a little bit more when I explain this. So talking about neck extension, if I have a glass of water, what if you were to take a drink, typically we tilt our head back a little bit and take a drink. And that's comfortable for most people. Now, if I were to kind of hold my head looking straight forward without moving it and tried to take a drink, it still kind of works, but it might not be as comfortable as tilting my head back. Now, if I were to tuck my chin way down to my chest like this and try to take a drink of water, it's really impractical and doesn't really feel super functional. I might dribble some water down on my shirt. So I want you to keep that in mind as well. When you are latching your baby on, you actually want to see some space between their chin and their chest. Because if their chin is tucked way down to their chest, they're not going to be able to swallow and feed functionally. Body alignment is also a little tip here. So looking at the images here on the screen, that's my little one in the pink, but you can see she had fallen asleep, but there's some space between the chin and the chest here. Her neck is extended so that she can feed comfortably. Body alignment is also worth mentioning. So if you look at the little drawing here on the screen, you'll see a little baby in a yellow shirt. And if you drew an imaginary line, you could draw a straight line pretty much from the ear to the shoulder to the hip. And it's also helpful to have kind of a neutral body alignment for optimal feeding. So bringing back that water glass analogy, most of us, we take a drink of water, we're facing forward or our body's in a bit of alignment. If your head was turned to the side and your body facing forward and you tried to take a drink, it's also not super comfortable. So one way to kind of remedy that is to really turn baby's belly towards you. And this is the tummy to mummy tip. And not everyone might identify with the term mummy. I recognize that. But turning baby's body or their tummy towards their parent's body. So I'm going to come back to that in a second. The next concept I want to mention is I learned this from colleagues in physiotherapy, and I'm not a physiotherapist, but there's this saying that they have that is proximal stability leads to distal mobility. And in plain English, what that means is that when our core is strong and stable, proximal stability, then our extremities have more mobility and can move more freely. So we think of the arms and the legs as being extremities, but so is our tongue and the lips as well for an infant. So when an infant is posturally supported, they've got a nice supported core, and they're feeling nice and secure against their parent, as well as having some extension in their neck, then they have better distal mobility or better function of their tongue and their lips for creating stability in feeding. So just coming back to this little drawing of the parent with the little baby in the yellow, belly is right against the parent, and the hips are a little bit flexed. For new infants, they're used to having their hips flexed like a little froggy in the womb. And that is actually how they feel most stable. So don't try to kind of keep their legs out straight. Or if you notice their legs are kind of out straight and sticky, like kind of hanging off the earth or hanging off the breastfeeding pillow, then you actually might benefit from turning their belly closer to the parent to be more in contact and letting those little hips be flexed. That gives them more proximal stability and better stability with feeding and latching on. Any questions about that right now? I know it's a lot of concepts that I'm throwing at you, but how's that landing? Got some little hearts and thumbs up. Awesome. So tummy to mummy, again, or tummy to parent, is a way to achieve that proximal stability. So in the images here, you'll see that the infants who have their bellies kind of against their parent and a little bit of extension or space between their chin and their chest have more stability and often are latched more comfortably. So may this be freeing to you. You don't necessarily have to prop your baby and your breast up on a pillow. If that's a tool you use, there's nothing wrong with that, but you don't have to feel like a prisoner to the breastfeeding pillow. A more laid back position, or it's also called a biological nursing position, which is reflected in the little drawing of the blue pillows behind the parent and the baby in the yellow, and the image right underneath that. That's a mom who had just given birth. Using a bit of a laid back position also uses the benefit of gravity to help maintain a deep latch and maintains that physical stability of your baby being supported on your body. So if you latch your baby on and then say you're sitting up, you could scoot your bottom forward and lean back a little bit, which would help give you the benefit of gravity, make everyone feel generally more supported than if you're leaning forward like a goblin and killing your back and shoulders. And this helps to facilitate your baby's normal and natural feeding reflexes. Another tip that I want to offer that's really important is to avoid placing pressure on the back of your baby's head. So we're often we hear a lot with young babies, oh, support the head. And we want to put our hands here behind baby's head. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit about birth, basically. Fetuses, infants have this incredible reflex that serves a valuable purpose in the process of giving birth. So when they are far enough down in your pelvis, that the occiput or the back of their head is stimulated by that pressure as they're moving through the birth canal, they actually have a reflex to push back or extend, which as they kind of descend and come out of the birth canal, it allows them to descend and rotate and be born. So that's a fantastic reflex for birth, right? That pressure on the back of the head causes them, at a certain point in labor, causes that extension and descent. However, while it's a great birthing reflex, it's also a terrible breastfeeding reflex because if we're pushing on the back of our baby's head, and then they start doing this and pushing back, it feels like we're fighting against them to actually get them onto the breast. So not a great breastfeeding reflex. So instead of placing your hand here on the back of your baby's head, I actually encourage parents to bring their hand down and let this little web or this little hammock in between your thumb and your index finger support the nape of your baby's neck. And additionally to that, as you bring your baby onto your body, don't tilt your baby's head down because that's bringing the chin down to the chest. If you're going to place any pressure to bring your baby into your breast, let that be in the heel of your hand. Let that pressure be there, supporting between their shoulder blades. So we're not pushing forward on the head. We don't want to push the chin down or stimulate that reflex where baby's going to be pushing back into your hand. We want to bring the hand lower, actually, and support that nape of your baby's neck. And I promise you, you might fear that your baby feels really fragile, or you're worried that that's not enough neck support. But if you've ever witnessed a birth or if you're going to experience birth, babies go through a lot more to get here. And I promise you, this is gentle and it's not going to hurt your baby's neck. Yeah. So here's a few things that I'm assessing and I'm kind of looking for when I'm supporting a family in a home visit. I'm looking for, is baby's chin anchored in the breast tissue? So is the chin landing the latch? As they come onto the breast, is their chin the first thing making contact? Is the nose free? Or if the head is tilted down like this, you're going to see baby's nose buried in the breast. And sometimes people feel that they have to use their thumb to keep their breast tissue out of the way, when often scooting baby down a little bit and giving them more neck extension frees their nose. So is their nose free without actually needing to kind of hold the breast steady? We're looking for a wide mouth as well, space between the chin and the chest. Another thing is, are the arms kind of wrapped around the parent in a bit of a hug? Sometimes people will bring their baby on, but their arms are kind of in front of them like this, which creates more space between the parent and the infant. And can also kind of contribute to this feeling of being a little bit unstable as well. So oftentimes if someone latches their baby on, I encourage them, open your baby's arms up like a hug so that their chest can make contact with your body. Their arms are kind of hugging around you. And that gives the opportunity for their chin to be the first thing to land when they reach your breast as well. So try to make sure that we don't have arms secretly kind of tucked in front of them. Is baby's body secure against their parent's body? And again, hips are flexed. So if you're using a breastfeeding pillow and your baby's legs are sticking straight out, chances are they're a little bit less stable and you want to bring them in towards you. We're going to look at some images and I'm going to point out what each of these points looks like. So you can actually kind of see what this looks like on actual babies who are nursing. So bear with me for a second if it still feels a little bit kind of vague. Just another note here, asking yourself about whether your baby is getting enough milk. So the baby here in this video that you're seeing on the screen, this baby is doing non-nutritive sucking. So what you'd notice is that this baby really was kind of latched on quite shallow, kind of just on the nipple. You're going to notice dimpling of the cheeks, and we're not really seeing big swallows. You might also notice in this video that baby's chin is a little bit tucked here. As baby moves on to the breast. I wonder if I can play that again. Oh, goodness. Sorry, I've jumped all the way back to the beginning. Bear with me a second here. There. As baby, if you were to kind of look at where's the nipple position before baby's mouth actually makes contact, the nipple's kind of lined up with the mouth, not the nose. So I would advise this mom to scoot their baby down a little bit so that we could get some more extension here, space between the chin and the chest. And it's called breastfeeding, not nipple feeding, for a reason. So this baby's kind of just latched onto the nipple. And there'd be a pretty good chance of this mom experiencing some compression or some nipple pain. So here's another example. You can see this baby's mouth is much wider than the last baby. So there's a bit of a pace to baby sucking. Baby's actively swallowing with a deeper latch. And that chin is nice and anchored in the breast. But can you kind of see the difference between the mouthful of breast that this baby has versus the last baby that we looked at? This baby's kind of suckling on the nipple a little bit. And this is a very, very short video, but you can kind of see deeper, larger swallows. Now, I will kind of say, looking at this image, if I were supporting this parent, I might also scoot baby down a little further and kind of turn the baby's body a bit closer to the parent's body, because I kind of see the arm is a little bit tense here, and there could be a little bit more space between the chin and the chest. But I show this video also in the spirit of recognizing that not every latch is going to be textbook perfection. So those are a couple of tweaks I might make if this were a mom who was telling me they were experiencing nipple pain. But we can see a much wider latch here and kind of deeper swallows. So we know that the second baby is likely to be breastfeeding, not nipple feeding, and drawing out more milk. In general, just some positioning tips. One thing is that, I tell people to get comfortable, really prioritize your comfort. So a lot of people, in an attempt to bring their nipple to their baby, or they get the breastfeeding pillow set up in front of them, they put their baby on the breastfeeding pillow, and then they try to bring their breast to the baby. This often leads to people being really hunched forward. So if you're not already suffering from carpal tunnel in pregnancy, you will be if you're having to hold your breast constantly and keep your wrist in an unnatural position. So remember that you'll be spending a lot of time breastfeeding your baby, and it's important to support your back and your arms with pillows. And this more laid back positioning is really going to facilitate the opportunity for you to exhale and kind of let your shoulders go a little bit and not to be holding this really tense, awkward position. If you do need to lean forward to give your baby, lots of support during that initial latch, especially in the early days, if your baby's a bit early, or just because human infants are born immature, that's okay. Don't feel like you can't lean forward or give your baby support. But what I encourage people to do, if they need a lot of physical support to get latched on, that once your baby's on, bring your bottom forward and then lean back because, again, that's going to help prioritize comfort and protection of your shoulders, your neck, and your back. Also, this might be kind of a silly thing to say, but like bring your baby to where your nipples go. Like a lot of people are, again, thinking back to those images that we saw where we're holding babies up here, getting the breastfeeding pillow. I also see tips for people with large breasts, often involving rolling up a towel and putting it under the breast to prop the breast up. But if your nipples go down, bring your baby down to where your nipples are. Like we don't actually need everything to be way up here. So, you know, I every body is different and like, not everybody. I would say most people do not have like really perky breasts that are way up here. If that's you, I love that for you. I would say that that doesn't represent most bodies, especially as we get pregnant and as things kind of change. So, yeah, rather than worrying about buying the expensive breastfeeding pillow and propping your baby and your breast up, work with where your nipples just naturally go. Yeah. Another thing, just repeating, looking for that alignment of ear, shoulder, and hip. So often that means turning your baby towards you so that there's that nice alignment and they don't have to turn their head to the side to try to drink. So again, picture trying to do that with a glass of water. It's really awkward. Um, Scoot your baby. So if your baby's kind of turned like this with their body up, bring their body towards you. It's much more comfortable. And again, look for that space between chin and chest. See if you can get your baby's arms. So this one on the bottom likes to kind of get stuck in front of baby's body often. So bring baby's arms around you and tuck it under in a bit of a hug. Signs of a suboptimal or shallow latch would be, of course, pain is the number one thing. It often feels pinchy. No one's really getting out the ruler to see if their baby's mouth is less than 160 degrees. But you can see in the image that's here on the screen that this baby has kind of a narrow gape and is sucking almost like you would suck on a straw. Whereas a more optimal appearance would be like this really wide mouth. Obviously, if you have cracked or bleeding nipples, that is a sign that your latch is dysfunctional or shallow. Although it is normalized, pain, bleeding, cracking, those things are not normal. They are common, but not normal. And I tell people, some tenderness as your breast tissue responds to big changes and fluctuations in hormones, as well as being stimulated a lot because most individuals aren't used to having their nipple tissue stimulated as often as they would with a breastfeeding infant. Some tenderness that I kind of liken to the sensation of having chapped lips. That's like the maximum I would consider like kind of normal. But if your nipples have any damage, like again, cracking or bleeding, that's not something to white knuckle your way through because that's something we can address and overcome. And there's no need to experience pain needlessly. If your baby comes off of your breast and it's looking really flattened, or like a new tube of lipstick where like one side has become more flatter than another, or like oftentimes that's the bottom that looks flatter than the top, or it looks really compressed and pinched and flattened. That's also a sign of a potentially shallower latch. Um, after your baby feeds, if your breasts don't necessarily feel softer after a feeding, and I have some stars, some asterisks by this point, because this is not always the case, especially in later stages of lactation as our milk supply starts to regulate. But in those first couple of months, ideally we latch our baby on, they soften the breast, they get a good feed of milk, and our breasts don't feel ultra full after they're done. If you're hearing clicking or smacking noises, or if your baby's a really noisy feeder, you're hearing a lot of like with feeding, Or if you notice that the cheeks are really sucked in and dimpled and they're using their cheeks to generate suction, that's also a sign that we would like to revisit some of these tips and see if we can optimize the latch. So I'm going to share a few images and kind of point out some things to try to bring all of these concepts together for you and make them a little bit more tangible. Are there any questions before I do that? Okay. So in this example, the one on the left, so this is an example of football hold or clutch position. And um, the one on the right, I genuinely don't think that this person is even breastfeeding. I think that this is more of a stock image, but it demonstrates, if I were to guesstimate, I would say this mom's nipple is probably like actually over here, in line with their baby's stomach. um, so this baby's actually up really, really far. You'll also notice, despite the cute little bow and it just kind of being a posed image for the sake of probably stock photos or Canva or whatever. Um, if we were to actually latch this baby on, we would have to bring them way down, and their chin is already quite tucked, but we'd have to bring them way further back in order to actually get that neck extension and to get a functional latch. So the second image, the one on the right, it's kind of hard to tell, but the blue pillow, there's actually more space behind this parent. So if you're utilizing a clutch position or a football position, you actually want to have enough space behind you that you can bring your baby far back enough that they could still have space between their chin and their chest. So it's a bit of a subtle difference, but if you look at the image on the right and the image on the left, the baby the baby on the right, who is a little bit further back, appears to have a little bit more space between their chin and their chest. Their belly is turned towards their parent. And the arm is also kind of around their parent in a bit of a hug instead of really tense and tight and pulled into them. And I would estimate that although the one on the right is likely also a stock image, that baby probably has a better latch. So that's one example. I'll just kind of point out again, we've seen this image on the left-hand side of the baby with the really shallow latch. You can kind of see the cheeks dimpling a little bit. The lips are kind of narrow, like a straw. And you'll also notice the little hand. That's the one on the bottom is kind of in front of this baby crossed over their body. So if I were supporting the family on in the left hand side, I would probably encourage them open that baby's arms so that the chest and the chin can be connected with your skin and your tissue, and that baby can get a little bit closer. So the baby on the right hand side in this image, you can kind of see this baby's a little bit older on the right hand side, but you actually notice the parent is very casually kind of holding baby's bottom with their arm, so kind of scooped over baby's bottom. The hands are open. You can see a little shadow here where there's space between the chin and the chest. Cheeks and chin have landed the latch, and the baby's nose is free. So we're not using our hands to try to get breast tissue out of the way. So another little video example. This baby's doing nice big gulps. And it's kind of hard to see this baby's whole body. I do admit, not every video that I'm going to be able to show you is going to show all of these components, but there is definitely extension in this baby's neck. I might encourage the parent to, if depending on where their arm is, I might tell them to snuggle that baby in a little closer. But just to go back to that for a second, you can actually see some really nice big swallows of milk here. And the baby's created a nice seal. Lips are nice and wide. Could this baby maybe be a little bit wider or have a deeper latch if we tuck them in closer? Maybe, but not bad. Another one here. I would say this baby has a slightly narrower gape. You can see the dimpling of the cheeks, kind of that sucking in of the cheeks here. Um, I'll just play that one more time. So I would probably scoot that baby down a little bit so that the chin is more anchored in the chest or in the breast tissue. You can't really tell because baby's hand is in front of their mouth, but because because of the nose kind of touching the breast tissue, that's telling me that the chin's probably not anchored in the breast tissue. So I would scoot that baby down a little further. So it's not just about the angle of the lips. You might see these examples, but if you kind of think bigger and look back a bit and wonder, okay, what's the chin doing? What direction is the nose pointing? Where are the arms at? Are they crossed in front or are they hugging around? Could we scoot baby's body down a little bit so that we get that neck extension? Even in images and videos that, show this close up of the lips and of the breast tissue, if we can think bigger and kind of imagine what that would look like zoomed out, we can probably think of ways to optimize that latch. Here's a great example of side lying. This one's lovely. Baby's making really, really big, deep swallows. You can see beautiful extension here between baby's chin and their chest. The nose is free. The chin has landed the latch, right? That chin is really nice and anchored in that breast tissue. Mouth is huge. Mouth is wide. Breastfeeding, not nipple feeding. And although it's kind of hard, again, you can't see the baby's whole body, but you'd presume like you could draw a straight line from that baby's ear to that baby's shoulder and see that this baby's belly is turned towards the parent. So just to kind of show you once more, really beautiful, comfortable side lying position with a great latch. Can you see those big swallows as the chin dips? You can actually see the swallows here. Just a few more examples, right? The mom pictured on the bottom is sitting upright, but belly is close to mommy, nose is free, arms are around this mom like a hug, going with the pink pants, and kind of more sprawled. Again, a little bit of an older baby, but stability, painless latch. And I like to point out too that these concepts are not only beneficial to breastfeeding. If you are also bottle feeding a baby, you can utilize these concepts for more stable and more comfortable feeding for your infant. So to look at the bottle feeding baby here on the right-hand side, you can see the hips are flexed. There's nice alignment. So ear, shoulder, hip are all in a straight line. There's really nice support from the parent's hand, not on the back of the baby's head, but right on the nape of their neck or kind of supporting between their shoulders. This parent is kind of sitting with a pillow in their lap with their knees up on a stool or something. And that baby is nice and stable. And again, extension between the chin and the chest here. So that baby can feed on the bottle comfortably. So don't, you can expand this to bottle feeding as well. All right. So that's kind of what I had to share with you about latching tips. And I had a few questions that came in online, and I would also like to make opportunity for your questions that might have arisen here. So I just want to chat about about the Milk and Matrescence program for a second here, and then I'm going to make some time for questions. So landing the latch, the fact that you're here and you're learning this now is going to give you a really solid foundation. And at the same time, we also often need more than just some tips on latching. In my practice as an IBCLC, I notice that many people really could benefit from a better understanding of how milk supply and milk production truly works, how to overcome specific breastfeeding challenges. So most of our basic courses are kind of covering what normal breastfeeding looks like, but not always what to do or how to get back on track if things don't go according to plan or if there are challenges. And We could also use some realistic expectations in connection with an IBCLC. So I have an online course, Milk and Matrescence, which is where I can really help you feel adequately prepared. I do this work as an IBCLC because I truly and deeply, wholeheartedly want you to succeed in whatever your infant feeding goals are. So, what is Milk and Matrescence? It is an ever-growing library of lessons, ebooks, and even bite-sized resources that help give you the best possible foundation to start your breastfeeding journey. It is designed to fill in gaps and to provide you what I truly wish every single parent knew about infant feeding: sleep, major life transformation of becoming a parent. And although, as I've mentioned already a little bit, though nothing can truly replace the art of practice or a nurturing village of support, in a world where many expecting parents are facing conflicting, unhelpful, and even piecemeal information from many, many different sources, this space is intended to be organized, comprehensive, and, lactation consultant backed education that's meant to reduce overwhelm and really adequately prepare you for breastfeeding. I asked my community about whether their prenatal classes had them feeling prepared for breastfeeding, and the overall theme was no. So most of those who had responded had taken a typical 6 weeks childbirth education class. It might have included some very general feeding your baby content in the program. Some people took the free 2-hour breastfeeding class that might be offered through their hospital or online. But in general, the feedback that I received was that it was general and didn't teach them many of the practical skills or troubleshooting advice. So in this course that I'm facilitating, there's lots that's self-paced. I'm really passionate about making sure you're feeling confident and equipped for how to start off on solid footing without this confusion about what a start looks like and how to get off to the best start. We also don't just cover what ideal breastfeeding looks like. There's lots of detailed lessons on how to overcome common challenges, protect your goals if things are not going according to plan. And there's lots more nuance than what a very standard general class is going to give you. And I did see a lot of you submitted questions about pumping in the online questionnaire that I sent out ahead of time. And I can send this out afterward, but I have classes on pumping, and there's also a really detailed module in this course. Pumping does not tend to be covered in most prenatal breastfeeding classes, and I have found myself really seeing a great need for this. So there is a module on pumping in the Milk and Matrescence course, and it's really, really comprehensive and important for you if pumping is a part of your plan. This is generally left out entirely. I'd like to thank you for being here and to take some time for your questions now. And if you have to go, that is also okay. I will put the recording up, and I welcome you if you have questions about latching or preparing to feed your baby. That's why I'm here. So thanks for the positioning tips. I don't think I would be able to tell the difference between clicking sounds from a shallow latch and how it sounds with a deep latch. Any other tips on how to hear or tell these differences? That's a great question. And generally, if your baby has a deep latch, you're not hearing clicking. So clicking is kind of that like, it would feel kind of like your baby's tongue is losing contact with your breast, which is typically what's happening and causing that clicking sound. A baby with a deep latch, you might hear kind of like a gulp, like a gulping sound, or even as they exhale, they might kind of go, but typically like really slurpy sounds, clicky sounds, are more of a sign of a shallow latch, whereas a deep latch is actually not particularly noisy. That's a really great question. Yeah. I see another, someone had sent me a direct message, and asked about inverted nipples or flat nipples. And I received this question online through the question box as well. So, breastfeeding with flat or inverted nipples. So, I want to first preface this with all nipples are good nipples for breastfeeding. And it's a very common concern if somebody has flat or inverted nipples, whether or not they will be able to stimulate that sucking reflex in a similar way to if their nipples were quite everted, and whether that's going to cause issues with breastfeeding. And my answer to that is firstly, um, if you are utilizing these positioning tips, and many of these steps for achieving a more functional latch, if you have flat or inverted nipples, those are going to help you tremendously. Just a second, I dropped my model breast on the floor. The degree to which flat or inverted nipples may impact breastfeeding depends a lot on numerous factors. So, for example, whether or not they begin to evert even a little bit with stimulation. So, for example, many people have flat nipples and may experience swelling towards the end of their pregnancy. So, we get edema in our extremities, like our ankles and our hands and fingers, but also in the nipples because that's actually an extremity. So if your nipples are kind of flatter than what they typically are, you can absolutely still get a deep latch. Some people benefit from the technique of reverse pressure softening if it's more edema, which involves kind of using your hand in a C shape around the nipple and pushing back towards the chest wall. So that would be like pushing back towards the chest wall like this and changing position as well around your nipple to different spots, gently pushing back a bit. Sometimes that alone is enough to get enough eversion of the nipple that we can get the nipple far enough into baby's mouth to stimulate that sucking reflex a little bit. If your baby has other anatomical anomalies, like a high palate, for example, then we might need to be working a little harder to actually get that breast tissue in baby's mouth a little deeper. So, again, revisiting all of the things we've talked about in this class today are going to be plan A, plan B, plan C. They're going to help you. Sometimes it can also be a bit helpful to do some shaping of the breast. So what I mean by that is you could make making a breast sandwich. So most of us have like a roundish breast, and holding the breast in this way to create a bit of a hamburger shape, or a sandwich shape creates a bit more of a shelf that your baby can get a good latch onto, and maybe a deeper latch than if your breast was quite rounded. Does that make sense? So a bit of a breast sandwich. What I would advise is that you try not to let your the bottom hand be too close to the nipple. Otherwise, your baby's gonna be quite shallow. And remembering that we want the chin to land the latch and for the baby to be able to get a deep mouthful of breast, I'd encourage you to bring your hand back a little bit. But you can create a bit of a shelf of your breast tissue, which can give your baby a bigger mouthful. So that's one piece. Some people use additional supports, especially if they have inverted nipples that come out a little bit with stimulation. So some people will use breast shells or even these little breast everters, which use suction to kind of draw the nipple tissue out. Some people will do gentle hand expression or stimulation or use a breast pump to draw the nipple tissue out. Now, some inverted nipples actually go in further when you do that, which again is not does not mean that you can't breastfeed. It might mean that we have to work a little harder, maybe make a breast shelf, make a breast sandwich with our hands, or in cases where we're doing all of the things and the nipples are just shy and they really like to go in further and don't really want to come out at all, and your baby's having a hard time getting that sucking reflex stimulated. There have been scenarios where I've used a nipple shield, which is a little silicone, it's like a little silicone guard that goes on top of the breast, and it can create enough length of the nipple to stimulate that sucking reflex, especially if your baby has a high palate or other anatomical anomalies, um, and get that sucking reflex started and your baby actually feeding at the breast. I will say though, with a in big capital letters, do this with an IBCLC. Like do this with some ongoing support. um, I would say there are varying degrees of flatness and inversion for nipples. The majority do kind of evert with stimulation and can still achieve a great latch. For the ones that are really shy and actually go inward even further, or for those babies who might have tongue ties or other anatomical anomalies, additional supports like a nipple shield could be valuable, but shouldn't just be freestyled. I would really get some lactation support for navigating that specific scenario. That's a great question. Anything else? You can pop them in the chat, or you're also welcome to hop on the mic if you'd like to ask a question. One more question that was submitted online was if I could explain what a letdown is. And basically, a letdown is uh, it's the process of your body releasing the milk for your baby. So the milk ejection reflex, or commonly known as a letdown, is a physiologic reflex that allows your milk to flow. So, there's a reason that our bodies, we don't just walk around constantly pouring milk out of our bodies. Um, when your baby suckles at the breast, it sends a signal to your brain to release a couple of different hormones. One is prolactin, which is your milk making hormone, which means prolactin is important because surges of prolactin are going to support your milk supply on an ongoing basis. And if you want to learn more about milk supply, it's really covered in great detail in the milk and matrescence course. Um, Oxytocin, which you may be familiar with for labor and for many other functions. Oxytocin is a hormone that is responsible for pleasure, for connection with other human beings. It's often called the love hormone. And it's also a hormone responsible for muscle contractions, both in the uterus during childbirth, as well as in the smooth muscle throughout the breast that's kind of that is surrounding the walls of the structures in your breast glandular tissue that's holding the milk. So what happens when that oxytocin is released from your baby suckling is we get contraction of the smooth muscle in your breast, which brings the milk down for your baby. For many people, this letdown or this milk ejection reflex can feel like tingling or maybe itching. But for many, it might feel like nothing at all. We might not even have any kind of awareness that we're having a letdown reflex until we hear our baby like gulping milk at the breast. So it might feel like tingling or itching. It might feel like nothing. But that's what a letdown is. And that was also a great question. So thank you for those who submitted those questions. And are there any other questions? Anything else that has come up for you through our time together today? Lots of a little thanks in the chat. You're most welcome. On that note, if there are no more questions, I will hang around for another minute or two. I am going to end the recording. And I, again, thank you very much for being here. Those of you who are preparing for your babies and those who are preparing to support those in your lives who are expecting babies. I am so glad you're here and that you're starting to prepare yourself on this journey. I hope that this has given you lots of really practical, actionable tips to be able to use. And if you would like to learn more about the full milk and matrescence course, I will follow up with some info and I'm happy to answer emails and questions about that. And best of luck to each and every one of you as you make this transition into parenthood and welcome your babies. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye now.